Hey guys, and welcome back to the ASX Investor channel, and welcome to another CEO interview. Today we'll be diving back into the world of the EV battery materials supply chain. We know the electric vehicle transition is really starting to pick up pace, and there's a range of materials that are going to be necessary to help to facilitate this transition. We'll be discussing the story of Vault Resources. ASX VRC are developing an integrated supply chain. They've got a range of really fascinating assets, from a mine that is in operation in Ukraine. Understandably, it's been halted with the current situation there. They own one of the world's largest graphite resources in Tanzania. They've got some prospective elements as well for lithium in Serbia, and they're really looking at the downstream processing opportunities as well. There's a lot of different irons in the fire for us to unpack. We're really grateful to be joined by the Managing Director, Trevor Matthews, and today we'll be talking about the Vault Resources story. Trevor, welcome to the channel.
Thank you. Great to be here and have the opportunity to talk.
It's an absolute pleasure. There is so much for us to unpack. I guess before we get into all of the recent news flow and discussion, can you just give us that overview of who is Vault Resources and what is that role that you're aiming to play within the broader EV battery supply chain?
Sure. Vault's been focused on the graphite side of the battery material supply chain since about 2015. So we're a reasonably long participant, I guess, in this process. And initially commenced with the Tanzanian project that you mentioned, the Banyu project in East Africa. And, over time, what we've done, and probably much more in recent times, we've, expanded our footprint and acquired the Zavalievsky Graphite business in Ukraine, which made us instantly a graphite producer. Then that, in addition to that, started focusing on downstream opportunities in probably, fair to say that we are doing a lot of work in the US, but we do plan to also develop downstream capability in Europe. Lithium license applications you mentioned in Serbia, and we also have some gold assets in Guinea as well. So a bit of a diverse portfolio, but reality is that the bulk of it is in the battery materials part of in the battery materials supply chain. And lithium is not a bad addition to that portfolio because you're still talking to the same end users, the cell makers and the OEMs in terms of, if we're talking EVs. So we find there's a fair bit of synergy as, available to us if we, as we progress that particular project as well. So a lot of materials, a lot of activities underway, and the integrated supply chain approach is something that we've been working on for a period of time. Being able to control, I guess, your mine supply all the way to products that you can deliver up to cell makers. And we've broadened our, market opportunity beyond just lithium-ion battery cell manufacturers with test work and activities that we've got underway with alkaline battery manufacturers, and also lead acid batteries as well, which we think is a really good opportunity for us, given it basically is produced as a byproduct of making lithium-ion battery anode material.
There is a lot of different moving parts there and components, so we'll definitely unpack them one by one. I guess starting first and foremost with Zavalievsky Group, understandably in the Ukraine, I can only anticipate that the focus is just on the safety of all of the workers and everyone there at this stage. My understanding is it's on the western side, so closer to Moldova, but can you give us the overview? It was in operation and producing, how things are progressing there and what could be anticipated, of course, in a really uncertain macroeconomic environment still.
Sure. The Zavalievsky business, as you mentioned, is right on the western side of Ukraine, about 160 kilometres in from the Moldova border, and not too far away from Romania as well, the Romanian border. So it's been, pretty secure during the whole since the outbreak of war and the conflicts progressed. It's now moved back to the East Ukraine and I guess southern Ukraine is where most of the hostilities are underway. And Ukraine, I think, is performing beyond anybody's expectations, I suppose, in being able to defend their country. So we, our staff are all safe. They're either, in fact, even considering moving back to Kiev, but at the moment they're based around Lviv, which is over near the Polish border. And our operating staff are all down at the township Zavalia, which is where the mine's located. So, there's got to say there's quite a push on to, for businesses to return to operations. There's been no activity. You could draw a 200-kilometre radius around this mine, and there's been just no conflict at all in that area. So I guess one of the things we're looking at is proposals for restarting the operation. The Ukraine president down are keen for businesses to either recommence operations or continue operating where they have, because the Ukrainian economy basically needs that. Obviously, we would operate it, or only return to operations if we can make a profit out of it as well. But there's certainly plenty of demand for the graphite products from Zavalievsky. They still get contacted by customers and other groups for supply materials. So it's always been a turnaround asset for Volt as well. So we actually had a couple of months of lost time during winter. They generally shut down when it gets severely cold there, which affects their operations. We see some workarounds there, and we think the opportunity there is to grow production probably up to around 20,000 tonnes per annum of graphite, with not a lot of capital expenditure on that business to achieve that. And then, in the longer term, based around what is a pretty substantial resource base, we've got compliance reporting around JORC code versus, Russian code material and what we can disclose. So we've only been able to report a portion, a relatively small portion of the overall resource base in the company. But, with more work there, we can publish, and people will become much more aware of the scale of this business and its the opportunity to expand production over time by putting in probably a new processing facility and then sizing that according to the market. And of course, there's a lot of support for production and expanding production of graphite in Europe, because the European Union, European Commission, through bodies like the Battery Alliance, EBA, the European Battery Alliance, the European Raw Materials Alliance, are very much focused on developing the battery material supply chain in Europe. So there's very little, major graphite deposits in Europe. So the opportunities are not numerous. So, Zavalievsky features pretty prominently in, thinking and discussions around how does Europe increase its supply of one of the critical minerals in terms of lithium-ion battery production and therefore the whole EV industry and energy storage industry as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that overview. And I guess first and foremost, most importantly, it's great that everyone's staying safe. And it'll be interesting to see how Zavalievsky can support the EU as well as Ukraine moving forward on that front, the economies there. I guess moving onto the other side, you've got another significant resource, the Banyu resource, in fact, one of the largest graphite resources in the world, in the development phase at the moment. I think you're still undergoing this funding development. How are you going on that front? How's things progressing, and what should investors look for over the upcoming period?
Yeah, Bunyu has been is a really large scale project. It's got great infrastructure and very long mine life because of the scale of the resource, and there's still a lot more exploration you can do. But I guess when you get to a certain scale, you sort of start to think about, it's probably not a lot of point keep drilling and getting it bigger and bigger and bigger. We can come back and do that later. But the project itself has had its feasibility study completed and a pre-feasibility study on a much larger project. So we're developing this project in two stages, stage 1 and 2. that concept allows you to develop a project with a lot less capex, a lot less financing required. Your workforce is smaller, so your ability to train people and mentor is a fairly or a lot more simplified than if you go for a much larger business where you're trying to upskill a whole large number of particularly local employees who probably don't have the skills you need to operate a mine. So that can be, a pretty difficult process and quite risky when you get into operations or commissioning and wrap up. So by doing it on a small scale, we felt, that would de-risk the development of the project. But the longer term aim is obviously to expand that in a stage 2 expansion. We're yet to do the full feasibility study for the expansion, but as I said, we have got a pre-feas on a much bigger project, which we sort of use as a proxy for what an expansion would look like. And that's based around 170,000 tonnes of annual production. So the pre-feasibility study, our stage 1 is based on approximately 24,000 tonnes per annum of production. And a key part of any financing. So we've completed the feasibility studies, we've got our environmental approvals, we have our mining licenses for the footprints for stage 1 and 2, so you don't get held up as you want to progress through those development stages. And then we've also put in place arrangements around construction contracts and various other commercial arrangements. And we have offtakes in place already, some which we put in place some years ago with private Chinese processors, which are fine when we were looking at doing alternative sort of forms of funding rather than conventional bank finance. But once you engage with the banks, they have a different level of due diligence and credit approval processes. So what they like to see is, financial statements and balance sheets, audited accounts and that for the counterparties. And unfortunately with private Chinese processors, they don't produce audited financial statements. So consequently, we're in a process of refreshing those contracts with other groups who do tick that box, and those discussions are well underway. I think over the course of this quarter, we should be able to get close to finalising the offtakes, or if not finalising those agreements. And then we will be able to proceed forward with funding offers with the banks and financial institutions that we've been talking to. So and have progressed to the point where we're at that sort of preliminary funding offer stage. So it's just a sequence of obtaining the required offtakes and then progressing to a funding proposal. And once we accept one of those proposals, we can then start to move forward into that next phase for the Bunyu development.
That's fantastic. And so it sounds like it's all coming together on that front. It's also interesting. So we wrap up the upstream then, but of course you're doing a lot of work on the downstream and considerations of processing, a lot of moving parts on that front. Did you want to just give the viewers an overview into what you've been looking for in the downstream processing, and what's that opportunity that you really see as well?
Yeah, sure. I guess the overarching concept from mine supply to downstream, and like I say, delivering a product straight to the cell maker that meets their requirements and specifications, is your ability to manage the supply chain. So, and particularly, we've as we plan to do, we have a positive view on our ability to get Zavalievsky, that it will return into production. As we develop Bunyu, we will then have 2 mining sources for graphite, or graphite concentrates, or products that would be then transformed into coated, spheronized, purified graphite for battery anode material in lithium-ion batteries. But also some of the byproduct that you get, particularly post spheronization, well, not particularly, it all comes from post spheronization. So we've reversed the flow sheet around on the downstream processing, done some work with our technology partners, American Energy Technologies, who are based in Chicago in the United States. So they're providing us with a lot of the IP around the CSPG processing and the development of these other products. So So the flow sheet, actually, what we do first is purification. And then we mill or grind, obviously shape the material, not shape the material, but grind it down to a fairly fine particle size, probably, around that 30 micron sort of size, which is virtually like talcum powder. And then you spherinize the material, which is really a shaping process. So, and it's a folding sort of, so what you're doing is you're turning graphite, which is in a flake shape. And when you look at graphite particles, they're just stacks of graphite flake, and you're folding it into, spherical sort of shape. But not all of that material, survives that process. So there's waste, and, you hear different yields of, as low as 30% for spheronization in China. I think a lot of the recent work done by other groups is, that have downstream processing plans probably would be targeting somewhere north of 50 up to maybe as high as 75% spheronization yield, but you're still getting byproducts of 25 to 50% depending on where you're sitting there. And then from there, what you're doing with that material, because it's purified, we then we do some additional work and turn it into a compound, and we've been providing compounds to coat different components of the alkaline battery, which improves conductivity and improves the cost structure, because they use some rare earths in some of the components inside the alkaline battery. So these products are improving performance and saving money, which is, obviously pretty important. And these are for alkaline batteries that are targeting large-scale energy storage. So we've got a joint development agreement with Urban Electric Power. Recently had a pretty successful installation at the San Diego University, where they've installed a very large uninterruptible power supply or battery backup in the university for their computing resources. So that's a really interesting area, and the value add on these products is significant. We haven't settled on pricing yet, but we expect we're going to be able to achieve something close to what we can get for battery anode material, which is, for a coated product, north of about $8,000 a ton and higher. So it's quite a significant value add from products that, sold at the mine gate, probably for, at the moment, around, $800 a ton, or thereabouts. So they're, it's quite a big sort of change in value, as I said. And the other battery technologies in lead acid batteries, and we're working with a group called Apollo Energy Systems, who have been a long participant in that area. And they, similar sort of process, we're modifying this purified graphite, or what we're calling an ultra high purified graphite, because our purification results are, we're achieving 99.98% purity, which is very high purity and very little other elements in there, which makes the product attractive as well, in terms of other impurities. And that's being used as the expander in a lead acid battery. And again, this is about improving the performance of the battery and a cost benefit as well. So we see some great opportunities to develop those markets. Interestingly, when you set up these CSPG facilities to make products for lithium-ion batteries, you can elect not to spherinize and just go through the purification and the milling process, and then you can shift more product into that market depending on where your demand is. And so we have the ability to basically modify our production output depending on where the market is, and how much products we need to supply to lithium-ion battery manufacturers versus the other markets. We own the IP that's being developed as well, and that's been provided by AETC, but those rights are retained by us, and so that gives us other marketing opportunities to make these graphite products and sell them to other battery manufacturers in lead acid battery and alkaline battery sectors as well. So, and they are potentially very large markets. Those battery technologies aren't sitting still while, lithium-ion batteries are becoming, a much bigger part of, I guess, the energy supply chain. But, so we think being across all those sectors makes sense. And the opportunities for this to be replicated into Europe, we're focused on the US at the moment, but you can use the same technologies and develop relationships and production capability in Europe as well. I might just move on to energy supply developments and some of the things we're doing in the cell making side. So we've announced a big agreement. What is a pretty substantial development? There's at least 12 different participants involved in this super site development. They haven't announced the location, but I think they're not far away yet. It's a bit of a negotiation with states in the United States about incentive packages, which include, can include power supply and other, negotiated power rates, I guess, as part of their incentives that they'll supply. So the benefit to us is, though, that they're doing all the site selection, doing these negotiations with the states. They'll build the facility that will house our processing equipment. So we don't need to incur any capital until we're ready to actually install all the equipment inside the facilities that they'll build. Then we'll, prior to that, we'll enter into a long-term lease agreement that basically provides us with our presence or footprint in this big integrated super site. So there'll be other suppliers of battery materials there and components, and there'll be cell makers there. And we're the only graphite battery anode producer that's currently got a spot in this facility, being developed by some very credible people. Bob Gallion, who's a bit of a legend in the lithium-ion battery space, is the chairman, and Jeff Yambrick is the CEO, and Jeff's got lots of lithium-ion battery experience as well. Companies like Asphalt and others that are cell makers. So they're and Bob's the ex-chief technology officer, I should mention, for CATL, the biggest cell maker in the world. So they're really credible industry people, and they're the key to pulling this facility together. So we see this as a great opportunity. Once the cell makers are announced, we've already had a dialogue with one of the groups that's going to be, as we understand it, have a presence and be a cell manufacturer there, about our supply of battery anode material for them. We've also got another group we've announced to the market. Sorry, we haven't announced their name, but we've announced that we're in a process of test work, and there's another round of further work we're doing with them, which is quite specifically developing a product purely for their specifications for battery anode material. And they're a really, really exciting partner for us, which, in the near future, we'll be able to sort of release their name and just where we're at with them as well. But our expectation is that we are moving down the pathway of moving towards an offtake with them. But, you have to go through these processes. It's not a quick, just get into production and you can start, going to scale and selling 10 or 20,000 tonnes a year. I'm sure, with other groups that have maybe spoken on this program, that, there is a qualification and certification period with cell makers, which is, required by them, by their OEMs, because these batteries need to be able to, be reliably operating over extended periods of time. So they need, to be basically performing to a certain level that is required by the end users. So the cell makers need to make sure and certify and qualify all their suppliers to make sure that the products they're supplying, support that objective. And so, yeah, there's a bit of a process there, but, we're well engaged in that, and we see, great opportunities in this whole downstream area across a whole range of battery technologies.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, and I appreciate that overview as well. It looks like there is a lot of opportunities. It's not only focused on the one component of the supply chain too. I guess any final reflections that you had for Vault Resources shareholders, or those who are prospectively new to the ASX VRC story, and any insights as well that you can share about the outlook that you're seeing on the graphite side with demand, talking to so many different stakeholders within the supply chain.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is starting to see a lot more recognition of the role that graphite plays in this whole energy storage and new energy supply. So I think it's fair to say that graphite's been the poor cousin, so to speak, in the whole discussion around battery materials. Obviously, the focus has been on lithium and lithium supply. To a certain extent, the cathode materials like nickel, cobalt, and then sort of now starting to see that graphite's starting to get some focus and attention, which is sort of unusual given it's the dominant material in the lithium-ion battery. But maybe that's a function too that at the moment it's dominant Chinese supply. So I guess markets have sort of assumed that they would just be able to ramp up production and meet the requirements going forward. But I think what's starting to appear is that isn't happening, and I think there's also a quest within Europe and the US, which is where we're focused. So all of our downstream activities and even our graphite supply is very much focused on this sort of supply chain, delivering products into Europe and the United States. And diversity of supply is a big thing as well. So not being reliant on either one company, or if you're looking at it from a country sort of perspective, one country being the sole supplier for what is a key mineral or a key product that's required for these batteries. I mean, without graphite, there is, you're not going to be making any lithium-ion batteries, and you're not going to be therefore producing any EVs or other energy storage facilities. So I think that's starting to be well recognised. As I said, particularly in the EU, they're very structured about developing these alternative supply chains, and very much within Europe. And we think that's the opportunity that we have there with Zavalievsky investment, and also in the long run, and also lithium licenses applications in Serbia and other downstream sort of opportunities. So yeah, I think as far as Vault's concerned, I believe we have a really good collection of assets. I think we're doing some really good work downstream, and there'll be more news flow to come out of the US and eventually out of Europe on that. I think our mines, Zavalievsky will return to production, and that we will get Bunyu funded and get that into production as well, and then we'll be able to really implement our total integrated supply chain. And very soon also you'll see some announcements around our ESG policies and processes. So we've been doing a lot of work in that area, very bespoke sort of activities, so we'll be able to announce that. And of course that's another key part of developing what you're aiming for is a green supply chain, or certainly managing it in an appropriate way that you're meeting all the requirements under environmental, social and governance as well as part of operating your business. So we're doing a lot of good work, and I think Vault's slipping below the radar a little bit. Yeah, I think if investors were looking at an opportunity in the graphite space, then or more broadly battery materials, and Vault represents a pretty good opportunity.
I really appreciate your time. It's been fascinating unpacking the discussion. There's so much going on in the Vault Resources story. As you mentioned as well, it looks like graphite slowly as a sector starting to get its time in the sun. So it'll be fascinating to see where ASX VRC heads from here. Trevor Matthews, thank you so much for joining us on the channel. Really enjoyed this conversation and look forward to catching up again soon.
Great. Thank you.